Welcome to the Kathleen Wells Show. I'm Kathleen, your host. You know what? I've been on, almost 4 years on KCAA radio, and I frequently talk about racial issues, race relations in America, white supremacy, and some people don't like it. Well, I love it because I'm a black woman and I have a responsibility to talk about what's happening to my community. I listen to other talk radio stations in Los Angeles, in the Inland Empire. I listen to the mainstream media, and they all talk about it improperly, inaccurately. They all analyze each individual case of racism / white supremacy, or each individual case of police brutality, as opposed to looking at the system as a whole. And that's what I've advocated, is that it is the system. Anyone that, we can go over the Troy Davis case, the Oscar Grant case. No, we don't want to go over each individual case, the Trayvon Martin case. We want to talk about the system, because the same thing keeps happening over and over and over again, and nothing changes. So obviously the way that we're talking about race relations in America is inaccurate, is improper. So I want to get straight to my guest today, who is Dr. Claud Anderson, because he talks about it correctly. He talks about the system with which blacks must address so that they have economic power, so that they have political power, okay? And I want to get straight to him because his time is limited. He's been on before, and when he was on before, we talked about the Freedmen Federation. But now we're going to talk about the Ferguson decision. Now we're going to talk about police brutality. Now we're going to talk about what blacks need to do, what blacks need to focus on and need to talk about to get things straight for their community. So, Dr. Claud Anderson, welcome to the Kathleen Wells Show.
Well, thank you for inviting me back, Kathleen. Hope everything's going well out there in California for you all. I know you're getting a lot of rain.
Well, we got a lot of rain for us because we've been experiencing a drought, but we just had 3 days of rain, which is rare for Los Angeles, So
where's the drought? Only in the black communities?
That's so funny. It's not funny. It's tragic, isn't it? And in fact, you wrote a piece about Ferguson, and you said that blacks have been relegated to a subclass or a permanent underclass. Can you explain that to my listening audience? We are relegated to a permanent underclass. Explain that.
Well, you have to throw in a little bit of history. You want to hear the history real quickly?
Yeah, that's
understand
great.
How it works. But see, somehow my people never want to know history. They want to go into a doctor's office and want the doctor to operate or treat them without even knowing the history of the medical history of himself or his family. But I always try to start with history first. And what black folk have to understand is that what is in place now was set in place way back over 500 years ago. And that was set into the first Constitution of the United States. You have two constitutions, the United States Constitution. The first one was put in place in 1779, and it stayed in place until the 1860s. Then a second Constitution went into place. But in the first Constitution, it defined what you were going to be in the society at that particular time. That the United States Constitution became a social construct that said exactly how you're going to be treated from this point forward. And it declared in that Constitution that you would be a property that be owned by anybody and everybody, and that property could not own property. And they're going to build a capitalistic society based on who owns wealth, control, power, resources, businesses, and everything else. But property can't own nothing. So in the Constitution, when you see them talking about all these big claims about the land of the democracy and freedom for all people, and everybody got a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Well, in the original Constitution, that word happiness was not in there. Thomas Jefferson changed and put that in there. Originally, it was property. Blacks were property. And so in 1791, they passed the first naturalization and immigration law in this country, which says that this should be a country for immigrants. Black people are the only non-immigrants in this country. You're not immigrants. And the whole structure and the social construct in the Constitution and subsequent to the Constitution were based to be a land of immigrants. And that's why the naturalization law says that only blacks could only be slaves. But they never used the word black, Negro, or slaves. They used a euphemism, broad, ambiguous terms. They classified blacks in the Constitution as those people, those unhappy lots, those who are bound, those in servitude. And see, black folk never figured that out in the Constitution, when they talked about whites, they used the word we the people, all the people. When they use those words, they're talking about immigrants, anybody who's classified as an immigrant except black folk. And that became the social construct in this country, where black folk would always be in that class. And that's why the first law of public policy passed in Maryland in 1638 says that black people should never be permitted to enjoy the fruits of white society. That stayed true all the way up until the turn of the century in 1805, in 1803, in the Madison versus Marlboro decision, when the Supreme Court ruled in a case that it had no authorization to be involved in, and took on power that it does not have, and in that decision. And the United States Supreme Court has no right to be involved in any issue that overrules the United States Congress. And so then here comes, up by 1853, they decide to use those rights and those powers that they're not entitled to. The United States Supreme Court can get involved in issues pertaining to, or a federal official failed to do his duty, or in some lower case legal decisions, or anything dealing with ambassadors. But they don't have the right to overrule the United States Congress. So when the second Constitution was written in the 1860s, it was put in place to remedy some of the things that were spelled out earlier. So in 1857, in the Dred Scott decision, the Supreme Court ruled that a black man had no rights that a white man was bound to respect. That was in 1857. That a black man has no rights that a white man was bound to respect. That is a Supreme Court decision that has never been reversed. And so when the new Constitution was written, the second Constitution was written in the 1860s, with 1865, with the Emancipation Proclamation, the Civil Rights Law of 1865, the Civil Rights Law of 1866, the 13th Amendment, the 14th and 15th Amendment, and 9 civil rights laws. The United States Supreme Court jumped up and used authority that it's never had, and said, basically, we don't care what the United States Congress decides to do about black folk. We're going to keep those black folk in that original construct, the original mandates that were set out by the Constitution back in 1790. And that's what blocked black folk in. And they said, therefore, since we got them locked and boxed into this social construct, you cannot use race. We put them into this social construct as property based on race, but you'll never be able to use race to bring them out of it. That's why the United States Supreme Court has never ruled favorably in anything pertaining to black folk. And because we are still in that social construct of black folk having no rights that a white man is bound to respect. But you notice I did not say that a white man had no rights, or that an immigrant had no rights, or that a gay had no rights, or a Hispanic, or an Arab, or an Indian, or an Asian man had no rights. Only a black man has no rights. And consequently, you are up for grabs in any society, anything this society wants to do, because that decision has never been reversed. And so by 1960s, it came up again. And both President Nixon says the way we would shut off the black civil rights movement is to take the focus off of black folk and the black power movement and shift it to minority, women, and children. And this book came out of a memo written by Daniel Moynihan to Nixon, saying that's the way you kill the black movement in this country. And that says, make black folk disappear and make them invisible. So therefore they get no rights. They still won't have any rights. And it's called called it benign neglect. And then later on, by 1970s, it was converted over to be what we call political correctness. It became political correctness because the liberals in this country got together with the black leadership and said, what we'll do now is shift the focus to everybody but black folk. And nobody, under any circumstances, to mention black folk on anything, or put any value on anything pertaining to black folk, or involve them in anything. You're not going to hear anything pertaining to black folk. So all your black civil rights organizations start talking about things in broad, ambiguous terms, just as they did in 1779 in the Constitution. They talked about broad terms like minorities, poor folk, people of color, diversity, multicultural. Those are ways to shut blacks out and make sure they're never recognized. And later on, when Ronald Reagan came to office, he told his staff that the way you shut black folk down and keep them down is never talk about them negatively in society, but always use very broad, ambiguous terms, because they'll never be able to go inside those terms and find out that they are not included in anything. And yet our people always bragging about their minorities, their poor folk, their people of color. They never ever say, why don't we get something for black folk? When they play politics, they don't ask for anything for black folk. They ask for everybody. And they're the only people that shut down. And there's in the conclusion of my remarks now in history, there's absolutely no justifiable reason, legally or constitutionally, for giving special treatment to all these other groups that are pouring into the country now. They're coming in what they call looking for the American dream. The American dream was the Constitution in 1790, which says this is an immigrant country, and that no blacks are acceptable. And any white that comes to this country can get free land and free labor. That is the American dream. Black folk labor, and white Indian land. And for every slave that a white man owned, he can get 643 acres of land. And that wealth has been passed on from generation to generation of whites. And every time it was passed on, it multiplied 2 to 3 times. That's why today you're a permanent underclass. Whites own and control 87% of the things that are frozen in their hands, in their communities, in their churches, and in their corporations. Blacks own nothing.
Mm-hmm. And well, you say that you've written in your piece that is talking about Ferguson, you've written that the public dialogue that gives the false impression that all people and groups have contributed equally to the development of this nation, and nothing could be further from the truth. Touch on that.
Well, that's the game. See, if you ever want to make sure that the focus stay off of black folk, just pretend that blacks are not being treated any differently than any other group. They've never been treated any different from any other group. And so what they did in the late 1970s, they fabricated a whole bunch of groups that never existed. Like, for instance, Hispanics. Hispanics up to 1970 had always been classified as being whites. And 98%, not right now, 99 and 7/10 of all Hispanics in the United States are still classified as whites. But when the minority thing came into effect, and I have the dishonor of writing the first affirmative action plan in the country and for the state of Florida, approved by the cabinet and the governor in 1970. When that went into effect, everybody switched over and started fabricating these classes. They started this whole thing called Title IX to shift the focus from black folk to women, to make sure women got the resources. That's why in the state of Florida, when I was over education for 7 years for the state, that desegregation money is coming down that should have gone to black folk. Every county voted to give it to women. The same thing when you put in for other groups coming in the country. They come in here above and over black folk. They're going to get the benefits that black folk should have gotten. Nothing now would be targeted to black folk, and that's why they're not going to get anything. And ask me that question you just asked me again. I missed that point. What was it again?
Well, that they say that, the notion or the public dialogue or discourse is that blacks have not contributed anything to this society.
Right. Well,
yeah.
See, black folks need to challenge that because, see, black folks were the engines that drove civilizations around the world. For the first 300 years of this country, that 4 out of every 6 people coming to this country were black folk. And since black folk now, because based on the immigration laws, 98%, Kathleen, 98% of the blacks in America are the direct descendants of slaves, which means that they were here before 98% of all the other people arrived. And remember that point. The 90 black folk in America are all the direct descendants of slaves, except that 98% are direct descendants of slaves. That means that 98% of them were here before 98% of all the immigrants from Europe, Asia, China, Mexico, any place ever arrived. And so for the biggest tale that can ever be told is to get up in front of young people, especially young blacks, and tell them that we cannot focus on you. We cannot take those legacies off of you, of the 360 years of slavery, 100 years of Jim Crow segregation, and 50 years of benign neglect, because that's racism for us to help you. And so they said, take the folks off of black folk and pretend they don't exist. And so black folk now need to understand that the worst and the growth, you add insult to injury anytime you put out this myth that we are equal in this country and everybody and every group has contributed equally to the development of society. That is a tale, because black folk were the major engines that drove the development of this country, and that's everything in every industry until the immigrants came in here and took over everything and got first-class treatment. And black folk became second-class. And in the year 2000, when the Hispanics poured into the country, blacks got pushed out of being second-class and now third-class. And in about another 7 or 8 years, when all these Arabs and Asians are going to get together, they're going to get pushed out of being third-class citizens. They're going to become fourth-class citizens, and therein they're going to be locked in as a permanent underclass. And an underclass means those individuals, by the pure nature of their social economic conditions, will be forced to live as beggars and criminals for the rest of their existence. And so every time you have any shootings in Ferguson or New York or any other area, they're going to point for somehow say, well, black folk are criminals. They're going to relate it to crime or being beggars. That's why they got killed.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So talk to me about the prescription, the remedy, how we can reverse this trend, which is a trend that has been going on since time immemorial, since we've arrived, because you've given the historical the historical accounts of matters? How do we reverse this?
Well, see, the first thing you got to step and say no. Do not put us into any of those broad, ambiguous bags. Refuse to allow them to put you in that bag. That you got to get out and start dealing with these politicians, and you got to renegotiate your relationships with major corporations and with the political structure in this country, and say anything that's coming to us, we want to see it. Don't buy, and we do not want any symbolism. We don't want this about what you're going to do on Martin Luther King's birthday and how you did this. No. We want to know the only thing we want for the black community in the future are those things that we can measure, touch, and judge, and feel, and count. If it's not substantive, you don't want it. And you just have to start demanding that. And you start telling your politicians, we want you to go back to all these urban cities where black folk make up the dominant population. 70% of the population of black America live in and around 10 large urban areas. And if I go into those urban areas like Detroit, Michigan, where blacks were making up 92% of the population, Arabs came in there in less than 7 years, took over all 92% of the businesses, the gas stations, grocery stores, party stores, liquor stores, discount stores. East Indians took over all the cheaper motels, the Dunkin' Donuts, and the little grocery stores, the 7-Elevens. The Asians took over the nail shops, the wig shops, and any kind of hair products that were being produced by black folk. Black folk own practically 1/2 or 1% of anything in a major city where you got a 90% black population. And in this country, it's not social integration. It's not civil rights that are going to define your quality of life or whether you got any power. It's going to be what you own and control. And the police, again, are going to carry out the implements that were set in place politically. And in conclusion, I'm going to tell you, it's like a 5-story building, that black folk need to focus on if they're going to solve these problems. The first floor should be the foundation, the ground floor. Do not worry about anything until you worry about getting an economic structure underneath you, where you're producing power, wealth, and income. The biggest and best power in this country is money and wealth. So the first floor, you build yourself an alternative economy, you build yourself a black community, and learn how to practice group economics, where you spend your money with your own people at least 8 to 12 times before it leaves. Just like Hispanic money bounces 6 to 7 times, white money bounces 8 to 12 times, Arab and Asian money bounces 13 to 14 times, Jewish money bounces 18 times in their communities. Black money doesn't bounce once because we don't have any communities. We're the only people that build neighborhoods instead of communities. You cannot compete without communities. And so the first floor must be an economic structure where you can spend your money with your own people, first and foremost, but you still deal with the regular mainstream society, but first make your money circulate in your own community before it passes to another hand. Then on the second floor, that's your political floor. Your political floor, don't worry about voting all the time, running the vote. Voting is useless if you don't have an economy underneath you. If you don't have an industry that can produce wealth and power for your people, you're wasting your time voting. And you need to get contracts for every politician that runs for an office before you vote for them. Say, what are you going to promise and deliver to black folk? Don't tell me about what you're going to do for minorities and poor folk and people of color. What are you going to do specifically and solely for black folk? Why? Because politics is a process that decides who's going to get what benefits out of life. It's based on a simple premise of quid pro quo, something for something. One hand washes the other. You take care of me, I take care of you. You scratch my back, I scratch yours. You put me in office, I owe you. We're the only people that put a person in office and never anticipate getting any benefits back. And when you do get some benefits, they call them benefits. It's something that's symbolic that you cannot feel, touch, and smell, and you can't go to the grocery store and buy food with it. And once you get that money, on the first floor, you go to the second floor with those politicians, and you buy every politician you get your hands on the second floor. And those politicians you can't buy, you rent or lease them. Then you go to the third floor. The third floor is the political and the police and the court system. You use your politicians with your wealth power on the first floor to control the politician control the courts and the police departments. And quit marching is a waste of time unless you haven't got a purpose, and it's gonna somehow put an impact on the society. You waste your time marching. Marches soon become not marches; it becomes parades. Then you go to the fourth floor, and you take your money on the fourth floor, and you buy first floor, and you buy media properties. You buy radio stations, TV stations, cable systems, and daily newspapers. You own 35,001% of the media in the country. You can't communicate, you can't organize, you don't own and control anything, you can't even get in touch with each other. You got to own media by using the money off the first floor. Then the last thing you use your money from off the first floor, you go to the fifth floor and your education system. You shut down your education system and rewrite the curriculum so they take care of the specific needs first and foremost of what your people need. Black people are the only people in this country that have never enjoyed the fruits of an industrial revolution or having a major business, an alternative economy. And that's why you're going to cities like Detroit, Michigan, and use that again as an example, but the educational achievements where 50% of all the black adults can't read and write because your school system is dysfunctional. It is not addressing the needs of black kids. And any teacher tells you, well, I treat all my kids the same, then you need to be fired because black kids come to school with a totally different emotional, economic, and political baggage than a white child does. You got to address their needs along with giving them certain kind of skills and competences and attitudes. And also instead of trying to push every black kid into college on the 5th floor, sort of push them into vocational education programs in the early grades and teach them business principles, industrialization principles. And when they get to high school, don't let one black kid graduate from high school without a skill in his hand or a scheme in his head. Teach them skills so when they leave there, they can compete with the rest of the people in society. That's what education should be about. And that way they can then learn how to play the game and play the game to win and quit. Don't focus at all on technology. Technology is going to fail pretty soon. We're at 9 o'clock. It'll fail by the time you get to 12 o'clock. If you don't own and control resources, food, water, medicine, and energy, you're going to be wiped out as a people. That's it.
That's it. You've been listening to Dr. Claud Anderson. Dr. Anderson, will you tell them your website where they can visit your writings? He's the president of the Power Economics Corporation of America and the Harvest Institute. So, Dr. Anderson, give them your website.
Right. They can go to the Harvest Institute. That's Harvest Institute, HARVEST Institute, and that's .org, and get as much information as I'm giving you right now. All that's up in the clouds in the website. You can get all that information. Or you can get it by the books. Right now we have a power pack where you can order the books directly on all the things I'm talking about in 2 major books. One is called Black Labor, White Wealth. That's known as the Second Bible by Ebony and Jet magazine for black folk around the world. And the plan that's going around the country and out of the country is called Powernomics, the second book. Powernomics, a national plan to economically render black folk competitive. And you get 2 Dirty Little Secrets, different books, Volume 1 and Volume 2. You can get all 4 of these books in a power pack, again, by going to the Powernomics website, powernomics.com, POWERNOMICS.com, and you can order the 4 books in a pack called for $70. You get all 4. These books are not like any other books you've ever read, you're ever going to read. It is what you need if you're going to solve these problems. You cannot solve the racial problems. You cannot stop the shootings, the brutality, the lynching, the castration, the exploitation of black folk until you go back and change the social construct that was put in place back in the earlier days in the Constitution. And you got to also deal with the United States Supreme Court that's the guardian of racism in the country. They got to make sure that black folk can't get out of this crack by narrowly defining every issue, telling black folk you can't use race to get out of it. And then last thing is quit letting people tell you what racism is. Racism is a contest, and also and Asians and Arabs are not a race. Those are cultural groups. Hispanics are not a race, and stop people from saying that they're not a race. They are a language group. They are a culture group, and they're basically just white speaking Spanish. And don't let those people supplant black folk or subordinate black folk and get benefits that should be going to black folk. You got to solve the problem with black people as soon as you can if you're going to stop racism in this country. And yet I haven't seen anybody focusing on this, not from the White House down to the outhouse. Nobody wants to address the issues that are keeping black folks locked down. And if social integration and civil rights were going to solve the problem, it would have solved it 50 years ago when Martin Luther King was walking the streets. You cannot solve the race problems with social integration and civil rights. You have to have economic integration. And don't worry about separation versus integration. Neither one of those are the issue. It's aggregation. Black folk got to come together and pool their resources and learn how to compete as a group.
Black people have to pool their resources together and learn how to compete as a group. You've been listening to Dr. Claud Anderson, and as I said, he's the president of Powernomics Corporation of America and the Harvest Institute. Thank you, Dr. Anderson, for being on the show. I know your time is limited. I want to have you back on as frequently as possible because our community, my community, needs to hear you.
Well, thank you very much, and Dylan, I'll be glad to come back on. And I know I've been talking very fast because I'm trying to get all the information you wanted in there before my little 15 minutes is up. But secondly, make sure that all of our people and the other groups that are non-black understand it's not about hating anybody. I don't want black folk to hate anybody or mistreat anybody or try to hurt any other people. It's back to the fact I want black folk to understand that God sent them here black, their mom and father brought them here black, and so there's nothing wrong with being black. But they got to learn that as a pilot, I'll tell you, if I'm on a plane and I lose cabin pressure at 35,000 feet, then a mass will fall from a panel above your seat. And when the mass falls down because we've lost cabin pressure, the first thing you do is put the mask on yourself first. Don't get up trying to put it on people sitting beside you. And don't be like black folks that stand up in the middle of the plane and say, they're in the minorities or poor folk or people of color back there need a mask. I said, sit your own rear down and put the mask on yourself first. Save black folk before you try to save Hispanic kids coming across the borders or immigrants coming across or Asian or Arabs pouring into the country. Save black folk first.
I couldn't agree with you more. Thank you again, Dr. Anderson. I'm going to have you on again. You know, I book your interviews through your wife. I'm going to call your wife, Joanne. I appreciate you being on the Kathleen Wells Show, okay?
Well, thank you now. And go to the website, or they can call 301-564-6075 for the Powernomics Corporation and order those books. Again, that's 301-564-6075 and get the Power Pack and get all 4 of those books for only $70.
Okay, that's 301-564
6075, and right now they got a special called Power Pack. And these books are classic books, and they're bestsellers. They've been the bestsellers books. But most books stay bestsellers for 90 or 20 days. These books have been on the bestseller list for years around the world.
Well, I highly recommend it. That's why I have you on my show. I believe in your principles and your Powernomics, and I appreciate you being a guest on my show. I'll have you on again soon, okay?
Thank you, Kathleen. You have a good day now.
Okay, you have a good day too. We've
all
just
all right, bye-bye now.
Bye-bye. We've just been listening to Dr. Claud Anderson, who is the president of Powernomics Corporation of America, and he's also the president of the Harvest Institute. We're going to take a break right now. He's written an article about Ferguson, and I'm going to go over some points when we come back from the break. And also, hey, you can call in with your comments and questions. Comments because no questions because he left. So call in with your comments. The number is 888. It's toll-free, 888-909-1050. It's my responsibility to talk about issues that are impacting my community, or as he says, neighborhood. It is my responsibility to talk about issues that are adversely impacting my neighborhood. It's my responsibility to talk about them. So that's why I'm doing it, and that's what I'm going to continue to do. This is the Kathleen Wells Show. We're going to take a break, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. I'm Kathleen. This is the Kathleen Wells Show. We were just speaking with Dr. Claud Anderson. He is the president of the Powernomics Corporation of America and the Harvest Institute. Powernomics is a package of principles and strategies Dr. Anderson developed to explain the concept of race and to offer Black America's guide to become a more economically and politically competitive group in America. The Harvard Institute, which he's also the president of, is a think tank that does research, policy development, education, and advocacy to increase the competitiveness of Black America. And I also mentioned that you could go to his website to read his take on what's going on with the Ferguson incident and police brutality across America. So you can go to his website, harvestinstitute.org, and you can read about power economics at powereconomics.com. So I want to I want to say, hey, if you're listening and you heard what Dr. Anderson had to say about blacks being relegated to a underclass status, about the fact that 97% of blacks are not immigrants, they're direct descendants of slaves, and so we're not immigrants. Did you hear what he said about how other groups, how white liberals have required that black leadership embrace women's rights and marriage equality and immigration, and yet our group, the black group, our group, is not together yet? And, and also he added, this isn't about hating or not liking another group. This is about putting the face mask on when you're in an airplane, and they're saying that the plane is losing oxygen. You put the air mask on, the oxygen mask, on your face first before you talk about helping other groups, right? And I think the fact that we have neighborhoods and not communities, the black community, the black neighborhood is in need of an oxygen mask. So we're talking about getting that oxygen mask on. Hey, if you want to call in with a comment, the number is 888-909-1050. Let me talk to you now about some of the prescriptions, the remedies that Dr. Anderson wrote in his article about Ferguson. I'm going to talk about the first one. Actually, he went over them very briefly, but the first one is things to do. This is a prescription, and he offers actually four bullet points with sub bullet points. And the first bullet point is demand that blacks become highest domestic priority. You know, and as I said, we have to make this demand because we are relegated. No other group in America is relegated to this underclass status. You know, something that I put on my Facebook page is that, what did I say? Something about us. Oh, you know, during the Depression and during Prohibition, white crime was at an all-time high. Was it not? If you know the history, if you study the data, you know that white crime during Prohibition and during Depression was at an all-time high. Well, blacks have been in a perpetual state of economic depression. Perpetual state of economic depression. But in fact, someone said to me, their response on my Facebook page, well, that's true for all groups. They said that's true for all groups. They're in a perpetual state of economic depression. No, that's not true for all groups. I think that is not true for all groups. If you know the data. If you know the data. In fact, I think the unemployment rate never goes below 20% for black people. See, you got to know the data to be able to talk about this stuff right. You got to know the data to know that we are relegated to a underclass. If you read Michelle Alexander's book, Mass Incarceration, The New Jim Crow, you'd know that. If you knew the data, you'd know that. If you read the folks that I interview, Dr. Claud Anderson, Neely Fuller, Dr. Frances Cress Wellesley, you'd know that you know the definition of racism. You know that blacks can't be racist. We have no economic control. We have no economic power. Oh, you know, I'm coughing. I want to take a break, Mia, because I have something in my throat. We're going to take a break and be right back. Oh, hi, this is Kathleen Wells, and this is the Kathleen Wells Show. And my guest was Dr. Claud Anderson, and he was talking about the problem with the black neighborhood. We're not even a community. We're not even in a position to call ourselves a community. We're relegated to a permanent underclass, and it will get worse if we don't remedy it, if we don't turn things around. Dr. Claud Anderson is the president of Power Economics Corporation of America and the Harvest Institute. I want to encourage everyone who's listening to the Kathleen Wells Show to go to his website, theharvestinstitute.org, and Power Economics, Powernomics, powernomics.com. Go check out his website, and I think you're going to be quite, this is information that you don't get in the mainstream media. And so you've got, listen, this is how I feel about it. We've been seeing the same, we're like on a treadmill like a hamster. We've been seeing the same, not a treadmill, but that thing that goes around and around like a mouse, a hamster. It goes around and around and around, and it's like the same thing over and over and over and over again. So obviously, people aren't talking about it correctly. So, who is it that said if you do the same thing over and over and expect a different result, you're what? So why don't we try things different? We need some influx of new information and new ideas, right? So you got to check out Dr. Claud Anderson's website because he is saying things that you don't hear in the mainstream media. The people on your television set, they don't have the answers because the same things keep happening. So obviously, they don't have the answers. The civil rights movement wasn't the answer. Dr. Claud Anderson says until blacks get economic power, they have no power. They have no political power. They are powerlessness. And don't buy into these definitions of racism that are inaccurate, irrespective of what Merriam-Webster writes in her dictionary. Those aren't the definition. That's not the definition of racism. Listen to these people that I have on my program. They're offering some information that is novel that you don't hear in the mainstream media. Neely Fuller, Frances Cress Welsing, Claud Anderson. This is about helping our own community, our own neighborhood. This is about putting the oxygen mask on the black neighborhood. It needs it. It needs it because the same thing keeps happening over and over and over again. And you keep hearing the same people talking about it over and over and over again. And they talk about marching and they talk about praying. And that's not changing anything. So snap out of it, folks, and start to look at some new information. Start to study some new materials. Start reading some new documents. Start listening to some new speakers on the black community. Start learning stuff. I mean, people say anything. I see it on my Facebook page. You will hear anything. The lowest form of knowledge is an opinion. These folks that I bring on the show, that I interview, they have the information because it's based on what? Data. You see, Dr. Anderson gave us a historical perspective. If you have no data, you have nothing, merely an opinion, and an opinion is the lowest form of knowledge. Everyone has one. But nothing, the circumstances surrounding the black community are not changing. Police continue to kill black men. If you read Michelle Alexander's book, you know that black men are incarcerated at alarming rates. That should be troubling. Why? Because that's economic power going out of the black community. And you see the result. When you have no economic power, you are powerlessness. You are experiencing powerlessness. You are relegated to a subclass when you have no economic power. And what is the other thing I said? The unemployment rate for blacks it never goes below 20%. Do you hear that in the mainstream media? That's why you got to turn off the TV and go read some books. Because the information, listen, didn't the mainstream media tell us there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq? Didn't you hear that on your TV? And all those guys went over there fighting in Iraq for what? But all those talking heads in the mainstream media said they're weapons of mass destruction. So also the TV tells us that the unemployment rate is decreasing. Well, it's not true for the black community. Because it's never, if you do your research, the unemployment rate for blacks has never gone below 20%. Never. The data's out there. You've got the internet. You got a computer hookup. You know that you can research it. Google it. Google it. Has the unemployment rate ever gone below 20% for the black community, for black folks? Google it if you don't believe me. Anyway, I want to talk. I've got a few minutes left. What do I have left, Mia? How many more minutes?
You have about 7 minutes.
I have 7 minutes left. Let me go over the things that Dr. Claud Anderson said that blacks must do. You can find them on his website, but I'm going to go over a few of them. There are 4, and then some subgroups. The first one is, I mentioned it before the break. I'm going to mention it again. Blacks must demand that blacks become highest domestic priority. Considerable research indicates that increased immigration, especially of low-skilled workers, is harmful most to Native blacks. Go to the harvestinstitute.org to see the data. Blacks should demand that government resources directed to help bring immigrants to the United States so that they can escape poverty, gangs, crime, poor education, and unemployment should first be directed to blacks trying to survive the same conditions here in this country. Aren't blacks in America trying to escape crime, poverty, gangs, poor education, and unemployment? Aren't we trying to escape that in America? Hello? And you heard what Dr. Anderson said, that 97% of blacks in America are descendants of slaves. We are not immigrants. Okay? We are not immigrants. And America was built on our ancestors' backs. I don't care what anyone tells you. Do the research. See, people don't know what black people have contributed to America. They don't know. But if you do your homework, you will find out. They don't tell you in the mainstream media, but you've got a computer. You can research it. What have blacks contributed for the last 500 years to building America? You see, because in the mainstream media, they say blacks are lazy, blacks don't work. Well, we've been here 500 years working without getting paid. Hello? 500 years of that. This country was built on our backs. Okay, let's look at point 2. Sue prosecutors. Now, that looks good. I love that one because I always love to take a legal position on anything. That's how I was trained. Make a detailed assessment of suspect cases. Prosecutors have qualified immunity from suit and great discretion. Great discretion. In other words, they decide this or that subjectively. You know what I'm saying? Irrespective of evidence. People talk, it's all subjective. But when it appears that a prosecutor has manipulated a grand jury process, the prosecutor should be sued personally for conspiracy to violate civil rights. Sue the guy personally. Blacks should also file federal lawsuits against prosecutors personally, sue them personally, not in their status as a public official, but a personal lawsuit for giving police officers constructive immunity against prosecutions in instances where black men are killed. I like that one. The third one, renegotiate relationships with both political parties and corporations. That's important. People are hung up on these parties, Democrat, Republican, and it's this continual bickering and fight between the parties. Neither one of them are, there's not a hair's breadth difference between either one of them. They're both corporatized. They're both beholding to special interests. Both parties. Both parties are no good. Both parties are no good. And blacks need to renegotiate their relationships with both political parties. Blacks must inform all major political parties and major corporations that their intent to renegotiate their relationship, that they will no longer tolerate being treated as if they do not exist and displaced by immigrants. Blacks must make it clear that they no longer are willing to support anyone that does not support them and that neither supports black dollars or doesn't support they will not support taking blacks for granted. How did that go? Blacks must make it clear that they no longer are willing to support anyone who does not support them and that neither black dollars nor the black vote should be taken for granted. Yeah, that's it. Blacks must make it clear that they no longer are willing to support anyone who does not support them and that neither black dollars nor the black vote should be taken for granted. Hello? Does the Democrat Party take blacks for granted? I got an email from the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, and they put Obama's priorities, the Democrats' priorities for the next 2 years. And what were those priorities? Let's see. Women's rights, marriage equality, immigration, and climate change. I've been talking about mass incarceration and the drug war for 4 years. Why isn't that on there? Why isn't that a priority for the president, for the Democrats? And since it isn't, why are we voting for them? Why are we voting for Democrats? I mean, when are we going to start taking this stuff seriously? When we're begging on the street? We're already getting killed on the street, our black men. When are you going to start taking this stuff seriously? That's the question. Dr. Anderson says that we should vote as a bloc. Blacks should follow powernomics principles and vote in a bloc based upon quid pro quo agreements between politicians, their parties, and black people. I've got 1 minute left. What I want to say is that Dr. Claud Anderson was my guest today. I want you to check out his website. You go to the harvestinstitute.org or powernomics.com. He is the president of Powernomics Corporation of America and the Harvest Institute. I cannot encourage you more but to check out his website, read his articles. You'll get fresh information. You'll think about things a different way. He defines what racism is so that people aren't telling you, well, you know, that's racist. They always say blacks are racist. We can't be racist. This is the Kathleen Wells Show. My time is up. I'm delighted to talk to you, and I'll see you next week for another hot topic. I'm probably going to be talking about the black community again next week because I love talking about it because it's my community. See you next week on the Kathleen Wells Show. Thanks.